The dust of the trail rose in swirling clouds around the stagecoach as it rattled over the final miles toward Red River, New Mexico. Inside, Grace Donovan gripped her small leather satchel, her knuckles white with anxiety. It was the summer of 1875, and she was about to meet the man she had agreed to marry, a stranger who knew her only through letters and one faded photograph that didn't show her face clearly. The photograph hadn't revealed her crooked smile, the one feature of herself she'd always tried to hide. "Almost there, miss," the driver called back. "Red River comin' up in about 10 minutes. Grace nodded, though he couldn't see her. She smoothed her travel-worn navy blue dress, wishing for the 100th time she had something finer to wear for her first meeting with Owen Fairfield. In her last letter, she'd told him she'd be arriving today, the 15th of June. There would be no turning back now. The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the town's only hotel, a 2-story wooden structure that looked weathered but clean. Grace peered out the window, her heart hammering. Would he be there waiting? Would he see her smile and change his mind? "Red River Station," the driver announced, hopping down to open the door. Grace gathered her courage along with her belongings. 22 years old and traveling from Philadelphia to the New Mexico territory alone had required more bravery than she'd known she possessed. But after her parents' deaths from influenza last winter, there had been nothing left for her in the East except debts and painful memories. The driver helped her down and she stood unsteadily, looking around the dusty Main Street. Red River wasn't much a general store, a saloon, the hotel, a small church, and scattered buildings stretching out along the road. The mountains rose majestically in the distance, making her feel even smaller. "Miss Donovan." A deep voice made her turn. He was taller than she had imagined from his letters, broad-shouldered in a clean white shirt and dark vest. His cowboy hat was pushed back, revealing light brown hair and the most startlingly blue eyes she had ever seen. Owen Fairfield was handsome in a rugged way, with a strong jaw shadowed by stubble and laugh lines around his eyes that spoke of a man who smiled often. Grace swallowed hard, keeping her lips pressed together in the habit of a lifetime. "Mr. Fairfield, that's me." He stepped forward, removing his hat. "Welcome to Red River." He looked at her curiously, his eyes taking in her travel-rumpled appearance. "Thank you," she said softly, still careful not to smile fully. It's good to finally meet you." "Let me get your trunk," Owen said, moving toward the stagecoach where the driver was already unloading baggage. "I only have this one," Grace said, pointing to a modest trunk. "And my satchel." Owen nodded, easily lifting the trunk. "Hotel's right here. Thought you might want to rest before. Well, before anything else. Must have been a long journey." Grace nodded gratefully. "Very long, thank you." They walked in awkward silence into the hotel, where Owen arranged a room for her. The lobby was simple but clean, with a pot-bellied stove in one corner and a few chairs scattered about. "I'll come back for you at 6 if that suits," Owen said, setting down her trunk in the small room upstairs. "We can have supper at the hotel restaurant, nothing fancy, but the food's good." 6 would be fine, Grace replied, standing awkwardly by the door. Owen hesitated, seeming to want to say more, but then just nodded. "Rest well, Miss Donovan." He placed his hat back on his head and left her alone with her racing thoughts. Grace sank onto the bed, her fingers trembling as she untied her bonnet. What had she done? Coming all this way to marry a man she'd never met, a man who might reject her once he saw her imperfection. She moved to the small mirror hanging on the wall and made herself look at her reflection. The woman who stared back had wide hazel eyes, fair skin now flushed from the heat, and light brown hair that curled stubbornly despite her attempts to tame it. But it was her mouth she focused on, the right side of her smile higher than the left, creating the crooked expression that had been the source of so much teasing in her childhood. Her father had called it charming, but the girls at school had been less kind. She practiced smiling with her lips closed, as she always did in company. It made her look serious, even stern, but it was better than exposing her flaw to a man who might still change his mind. After washing away the travel dust with water from the pitcher and basin, Grace changed into her best dress, a simple dark green cotton that brought out the flecks of green in her eyes. She repinned her hair and practiced what she might say to Owen Fairfield when he returned. How did one make conversation with the man one was supposed to marry in just a few days? At precisely 6 o'clock, a knock came at her door. Grace took a deep breath and opened it to find Owen standing there in a fresh shirt and clean-shaven. He looked even more handsome than before. "Miss Donovan," he said with a small bow, "you look lovely." "Thank you, Mr. Fairfield," she replied, careful to keep her smile small and controlled. The hotel restaurant was just a corner of the lobby that had been sectioned off with some screens. A few other diners glanced at them curiously as Owen led Grace to a table. She could feel their eyes, the speculation in their gazes, the mail-order bride and the rancher. It was likely the most interesting thing to happen in Red River this week. "So," Owen said after they had ordered, "how was your journey?" "Long," Grace admitted. "But the scenery was beautiful, especially these last few days." "It grows on you," Owen said, looking out the window at the mountains in the distance. "Wasn't sure I'd stay when I first came here 5 years ago, but now I can't imagine being anywhere else." "Your letters mentioned your ranch," Grace prompted. "Fairfield Ranch, you called it." Owen nodded, something lighting in his eyes. "It's about 5 miles outside of town." "Nothing grand yet, but I've got good land, a solid herd of cattle, and the house is comfortable enough. Been working on adding a room before you arrived." He suddenly looked uncertain. "Hope it'll be to your liking." "I'm sure it will be," Grace said softly, wondering if she would ever see this house he'd prepared for her. Would he still want her when he saw her smile? As the meal progressed, Grace began to relax slightly. Owen was easy to talk to, with none of the gruffness she had feared from a frontier rancher. He asked about her life in Philadelphia, listening intently as she told him about her parents and her work as a teacher's assistant at the local school. "Why did you decide to come west?" he asked finally after their plates had been cleared. "If you don't mind my asking, teaching seems a respectable profession for a young lady." Grace looked down at her hands. "After my parents died, there was nothing to keep me there. The school didn't need me for the new term, and the house had to be sold to pay my father's debts. Your advertisement in the newspaper seemed providential." Owen nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Life has a way of taking unexpected turns." "Yes," she agreed softly, "it does." As they finished their coffee, a boisterous group entered the hotel, drawing their attention. 3 cowboys, dusty from the trail and loud with laughter, approached the front desk. "Randall and his boys," Owen explained. "Work over at the Circle R. Good men, but they get rowdy when they come to town." He stood up. "It's getting noisy. Would you like to take a walk? I could show you a bit of Red River before it gets dark." Grace nodded, grateful for the chance to escape the increasingly crowded restaurant. Outside, the air had cooled, and the setting sun painted the sky in brilliant streaks of orange and pink. "It's beautiful," Grace murmured, momentarily forgetting to guard her expression as she gazed at the sunset. When she realized her lips had parted in a genuine smile, she quickly pressed them together again, but not before Owen had seen. He stopped walking, turning to look at her with curiosity. "Why do you do that?" he asked. "Do what?" Grace asked, feeling her face flush. "Hide your smile," Owen said. "You just did it again." Grace felt her stomach knot with anxiety. This was it. "My smile is not pretty," she admitted, looking down at her boots. "It's crooked, uneven. I've always been conscious of it." There was a moment of silence, and Grace couldn't bring herself to look up. Then Owen's boots moved into her field of vision as he stepped closer. "Miss Donovan," he said gently. "Would you look at me, please?" Reluctantly, Grace raised her eyes to meet his. "Would you smile for me? A real smile?" he asked, his voice surprisingly soft. Grace hesitated, then slowly allowed herself to smile fully and naturally, revealing the crooked quirk that lifted the right side of her mouth higher than the left. Owen studied her face, his blue eyes intent. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled back, a warm, genuine expression that reached his eyes. It's the most honest thing I've seen since you stepped off that stagecoach, Grace blinked in surprise. Pardon? That smile, Owen said, still looking at her with warmth. It's real. Not perfect, maybe, but real. Out here, Miss Donovan, reality counts for more than perfection. The land isn't perfect, the work isn't perfect, and Lord knows I'm far from perfect. He gestured at the scar that ran along his jawline, which she'd noticed earlier but hadn't mentioned. Got this breaking a wild horse my first year here. Reminds me daily that life is messy. Grace felt something tight inside her chest begin to loosen. Most people find it off-putting. Most people haven't lived long enough in this country, Owen replied with a shrug. Out here, character means more than appearances. Your crooked smile tells me something about you, Miss Donovan. What does it tell you? She asked, genuinely curious. That you're unique, he said simply. And that despite what others might have said, you still know how to smile. That shows courage. He offered his arm. Shall we continue our walk? Grace slipped her hand into the crook of his elbow, feeling strangely lighter than she had in years. As they strolled along Red River's Main Street, Owen pointing out the various establishments and introducing her to townspeople they encountered, she found herself smiling more freely than she had in a very long time. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Grace woke early, her body still on Eastern time. She dressed carefully in a practical blue cotton dress, preparing for Owen to show her his ranch as he had promised the night before. A knock at her door came just as she was pinning her hair. "Good morning," Owen said when she opened it. "Thought we might have breakfast before heading out to the ranch. It's a bit of a drive." "That sounds perfect," Grace replied, this time allowing a small but genuine smile. Over breakfast, Owen told her more about the town and its people. "Doc Winters takes care of folks for 30 miles around," he explained. "And Mrs. Hollister runs the general store since her husband passed. She's also the postmistress. Then there's Pastor Jenkins at the church, small congregation but good people." "And your ranch?" Grace asked. "You mentioned cattle, but what else?" "Started with just 10 acres and a few head of cattle," Owen said, pride evident in his voice. "Now I've got nearly 500 acres, 60 head of cattle, a small orchard that's just starting to produce, and some chickens. Oh, and 3 horses, Samson and Delilah, for working the ranch, and Penny, a gentle mare I thought might suit you." He looked slightly embarrassed. "That is, if you ride." "I've ridden a few times in the city parks," Grace admitted, "though I imagine it's quite different here." Owen nodded. "Different terrain, but Penny's patient. She'll take good care of you." After breakfast, Owen led Grace to a wagon hitched outside the hotel. He helped her up onto the wooden seat, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. The team of horses moved forward, and they were soon leaving the small town behind. The landscape opened up around them, vast expanses of grassy plains punctuated by clusters of pine trees, with the mountains a constant presence on the horizon. Grace found herself breathing more deeply, taking in the clean, sage-scented air. "It's so open," she marveled. "In Philadelphia, buildings block the horizon. Here you can see forever." Owen nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That's what caught me when I first came. All that possibility stretching out before you." He pointed ahead. "See that line of cottonwoods? They follow the creek that runs through my property. We're almost there." As they approached, Grace could make out a modest but well-built log house with a covered porch. Nearby stood a large barn, a corral with several horses and various outbuildings. A few cattle grazed in a distant pasture, and she could see the glint of water from the creek. "Fairfield Ranch," Owen announced, bringing the wagon to a stop in front of the house. "Not much to look at compared to city houses, but it's solid." "It's wonderful," Grace said sincerely, taking in the peaceful scene. A small vegetable garden grew along one side of the house, and she spotted chickens scratching in a fenced yard nearby. Owen helped her down from the wagon, then stood awkwardly for a moment. "Would you like to see inside?" Grace nodded, suddenly nervous again. This would be her home if she went through with the marriage. The reality of what she had agreed to was suddenly very present. The house was simple but comfortable, with a large main room that served as both kitchen and living area. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, and windows let in plenty of light. The furniture was sturdy and functional: a pine table with 4 chairs, a comfortable-looking armchair by the fire, shelves holding books and a few personal items. "Bedrooms through there," Owen said, pointing to a door, "and I've been working on another room here." He showed her a new addition, the wood still fresh and unweathered compared to the rest of the house. "Thought you might like your own space at least." At first, Grace felt a rush of gratitude at his thoughtfulness. "Thank you," she said softly. "That was very kind." Owen shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed. "Want some coffee? I can start a fire." "I'd like that," Grace replied. While Owen built a fire in the hearth and put coffee on to boil, Grace explored the house more thoroughly. The bedroom was simple but clean, with a large bed covered in a colorful quilt, a chest of drawers, and a washstand. The new room had only a bed frame so far, waiting for a mattress. On the mantelpiece, she noticed a few photographs. An older couple she guessed were Owen's parents, and a picture of a younger Owen with another young man, both in Union Army uniforms. "My brother," Owen said, noticing her looking at the photograph. "Thomas, he didn't come home from the war." "I'm sorry," Grace said. Owen nodded, his expression momentarily distant. "It was a long time ago now, 1864. You were very young," Grace observed, studying the youthful face in the photograph. 18 when I enlisted," Owen confirmed. "Seems like another lifetime." He handed her a cup of coffee. "Sugar, please," she replied. They sat at the table, the coffee warming their hands as a comfortable silence fell between them. Outside, a bird called and the wind rustled through the cottonwoods. "Miss Donovan," Owen began, then paused. "Grace. I want to be clear about something." Grace felt her heart skip a beat. Here it comes, she thought. He's changed his mind. "I know this arrangement is unconventional," he continued. "And I want you to know that despite what my advertisement said, and despite your journey here, you're not obligated to go through with the marriage if you don't want to." Grace stared at him in surprise. "You're giving me a choice?" Owen nodded firmly. "I've been alone a long time, and yes, I want a wife, but I want a willing partner, not someone who feels trapped. So I'm proposing this. Stay here for a week, see the ranch, meet the townspeople, get to know me better. Then decide." Grace felt tears spring unexpectedly to her eyes at his kindness. "Where would I stay during this week?" "You could keep your room in town if you prefer," Owen said. "Or there's Mrs. Rodriguez about a mile down the road. She sometimes takes in boarders. Or," he hesitated, "you could stay in the new room here." "I'll sleep in the barn if that would make you more comfortable." Grace considered this. The offer was more than fair, more than she had expected. "I think I would like to stay here," she said finally. "If you're certain it's proper." "I'll make it proper," Owen assured her. "And if anyone in town has anything to say about it, they can say it to my face." Grace smiled her crooked smile, no longer trying to hide it. "Then I accept your proposal, the temporary one at least." Owen's answering smile was warm. "Good, now would you like to meet Penny?" The next few days passed in a pleasant blur for Grace. Owen showed her every aspect of the ranch, introducing her to the animals and explaining the rhythms of ranch life. Penny, the gentle mare, took to Grace immediately, and by the 3rd day, Grace was confidently riding alongside Owen as he checked on his cattle. In the evenings, they cooked simple meals together, then sat by the fire talking. Grace learned that Owen had come west after the war, unable to return to his hometown in Missouri, where too many memories of his brother lingered. He'd worked as a cowhand on several ranches before saving enough to buy his own small piece of land, which he had steadily expanded. "What made you decide to advertise for a wife?" Grace asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Owen considered this, rocking slowly in his chair. "Loneliness, partly," he admitted. "The work keeps me busy, but the nights are long, and practical reasons too. A ranch needs a woman's touch, children eventually, but mostly." He looked out at the golden light washing over his land. I wanted someone to share this with, someone who might see the beauty in it that I do. It is beautiful, Grace said softly. On the fourth day, they rode into town for supplies and to attend Sunday services. Grace felt the curious stares of the townspeople as Owen introduced her as Miss Donovan, visiting from Philadelphia. Some, like Mrs. Hollister at the general store, were openly friendly, while others were more reserved in their judgment. "Folks will talk," Owen warned her as they loaded supplies into the wagon. "Small town, not much happens." "Let them talk," Grace replied, surprising herself with her boldness. "I've endured worse." Owen looked at her curiously, but didn't press for details. That evening, after they returned to the ranch, a sudden summer storm blew in, bringing much-needed rain but also fierce winds. Owen rushed to secure the animals while Grace hastily gathered the laundry from the line. They both ended up drenched by the time they made it back to the house. "You're soaked through," Owen observed, concern in his voice. "You should change before you catch cold." Grace nodded, water dripping from her hair. "You too," she said, noticing how his shirt clung to his broad shoulders. They separated awkwardly, Grace to her room and Owen to the bedroom to find dry clothes. When Grace emerged in a fresh dress, her hair still damp but combed, she found Owen building up the fire, now wearing a dry flannel shirt. "Thought we could use some heat," he explained, "and I put coffee on." "Thank you," Grace said, moving closer to the fire to warm herself. The rain pounded on the roof, and occasional flashes of lightning illuminated the windows, followed by rumbling thunder. Owen brought her a cup of coffee, their fingers brushing as he handed it to her. Something electric passed between them at the contact, and Grace felt her cheeks warm. "I used to be afraid of storms," she admitted, sitting in the chair nearest the fire. "When I was little." "And now?" Owen asked, taking the seat opposite her. Grace considered this. "Now I find them rather exhilarating, all that power in the sky, the way they transform everything." Owen smiled. "That's a good way of looking at it." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the storm rage outside while they remained safe and warm within. Grace found herself studying Owen's profile in the firelight, the strong line of his jaw, the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, the thoughtful expression in his blue eyes as he gazed into the flames. "Tell me about your family," Owen said suddenly. "You mentioned your parents passed, but did you have siblings? Other relatives?" Grace shook her head. "I was an only child. My mother had several difficult pregnancies before me and none after. My father's brother and his family moved to California years ago. We weren't close." She sipped her coffee. "What about your family? Besides your brother, I mean." "Parents both gone now," Owen said. "Father passed right after the war, mother held on until 69. No other siblings, got some cousins back east, but we only exchange letters at Christmas." "So we're both alone in the world," Grace observed. Owen's eyes met hers. "For now," he said quietly. The fifth day dawned clear after the storm. Owen had to ride out to check on the cattle, making sure none had been injured or strayed during the bad weather. Grace stayed behind, wanting to make herself useful. She spent the morning baking bread and preparing a stew for dinner, then decided to tackle the garden, which had benefited from the rain but also needed weeding. She was on her knees in the dirt, her sleeves rolled up and a wide-brimmed hat protecting her from the sun, when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Looking up, she expected to see Owen returning, but instead saw two riders she didn't recognize. Grace stood quickly, brushing dirt from her skirt as the men approached the house. They were rough-looking, unshaven, with hard eyes that assessed the property and her with calculating interest. "Good afternoon, madam," the taller of the two called as they reined in their horses. "Hope we're not disturbing you. Can I help you?" Grace asked, keeping her voice steady though her heart had begun to race. The men exchanged glances. "Looking for Owen Fairfield," the second man said. "He around?" "Mr. Fairfield is checking his herd," Grace replied, not adding that she didn't know when he'd return. "May I tell him who called, old friends?" the first man said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just passing through and thought we'd say hello." Something about their manner made Grace uneasy. Owen hadn't mentioned expecting visitors, and these men didn't seem like the type he would associate with. "I'll let him know you stopped by," she said firmly. "If you'd like to leave your names, no need for that," the taller man interrupted, his gaze now openly assessing the house and outbuildings. "We'll catch up with him another time." He touched the brim of his hat. "Madam." They turned their horses and rode away, but not before Grace saw them exchange another look that sent a chill down her spine. She watched until they disappeared from sight, then hurried into the house, suddenly feeling very alone. When Owen returned an hour later, Grace was waiting anxiously on the porch. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately, seeing her expression as he dismounted. She told him about the visitors, describing them as best she could. Owen's face darkened as he listened. "Did they give any names?" he asked. Grace shook her head. "Just said they were old friends passing through. They seemed unsavory." Owen's jaw tightened. "Likely the Doyle brothers, their trouble, Grace, cattle rustlers, among other things. I testified against their cousin last year when he was caught stealing from the Circle R." "They know where you live," Grace said, suddenly understanding her own unease. "Do you think they mean to cause trouble?" "Hard to say," Owen replied, his hand unconsciously moving to the rifle in his saddle holster. "Could just be trying to intimidate me. Either way, I'll ride into town tomorrow, let Sheriff Morris know they're in the area." That night, Owen insisted on sleeping on the porch rather than in the barn, his rifle close at hand. Grace lay awake in her room, listening to the night sounds and wondering if the Doyle brothers would return. The peaceful feeling the ranch had given her was now tinged with anxiety. In the morning, Owen prepared to ride into town. "I won't be gone long," he promised. "Keep the doors locked, and there's a shotgun in the cabinet by the fireplace if you need it." Grace nodded, though the thought of using a gun was foreign to her. "Be careful," she said as he mounted his horse. "Always am," Owen replied with a reassuring smile. "Make yourself at home. I'll be back by noon." After he left, Grace tried to busy herself with household tasks but found herself constantly looking out the windows, watching for riders. The morning passed slowly, each creak of the house making her jump. Just before noon, she heard hoofbeats again. Relief washed over her. Owen was back. But when she looked out the window, her blood ran cold. The Doyle brothers had returned, and they weren't alone. A third man rode with them, and all three were armed. Grace's mind raced. She could lock herself in the house, but what if they decided to force their way in? Or wait for Owen to return and ambush him? She needed help, but the nearest neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, was a mile away. Then she remembered Penny. The gentle mare was in the corral, already saddled from when Owen had prepared her for Grace's morning ride, which she'd canceled after he left. Moving quickly, Grace took the shotgun from the cabinet, though she had no intention of using it. She slipped out the back door of the house and made her way to the corral, keeping the barn between herself and the approaching riders. Penny nickered softly as Grace approached. "Quiet, girl," Grace whispered, opening the gate. She led the horse behind the barn, mounted awkwardly due to her skirts, and then, taking a deep breath, urged Penny into a gallop away from the house, heading toward town. She had ridden perhaps half a mile when she heard shouts behind her. Glancing back, she saw one of the Doyles in pursuit. Grace leaned forward, urging Penny to go faster, but the man was on a larger, stronger horse and was steadily gaining. Just as she was certain he would catch her, she heard another rider approaching from ahead. Looking up, she saw Owen galloping toward her, his face a mask of concern and anger. "Grace," he called. "The Doyles," she shouted back. "At the house." Owen reined in beside her, positioning his horse between her and the pursuing rider who had abruptly slowed upon seeing Owen. "Get to town," he instructed urgently. "Find Sheriff Morris, tell him what's happening." "But I'll be fine," Owen cut her off. "Go, Grace." Now, reluctantly, Grace urged Penny forward again, leaving Owen to face the Doyle brother alone. She rode hard for town, her heart pounding with fear for Owen. What if there was a confrontation? What if he was hurt or worse? When she reached Red River, she headed straight for the sheriff's office, practically falling from pennies back in her haste. Sheriff Morris, a grizzled man with a stern face, listened to her breathless explanation. "Doyle's, you say?" he growled, reaching for his gun belt. "Been looking for them boys for months." He called to two men loitering outside the saloon across the street. "Deputizing you both, get your horses." Doyle brothers are at Fairfield's place. Within minutes, a posse of 5 men, including the sheriff, was racing toward Owen's ranch, with Grace following despite the sheriff's objections. She couldn't bear to wait in town, not knowing what was happening. As they approached the ranch, Grace's fear grew. What would they find? The sound of a gunshot in the distance made her blood run cold, but when they crested the final rise, an unexpected scene met their eyes. Owen stood in front of his house, rifle in hand but pointed at the ground. 2 of the Doyle brothers were seated on the ground, hands tied behind them. The third lay on his side, clutching his leg, which was wrapped with what looked like Owen's bandana. "Sheriff," Owen called when he saw them approach. "Good timing. Could use some help transporting these men to your jail." Grace dismounted and ran to Owen, relief making her knees weak. "Are you hurt?" she demanded, scanning him for injuries. "Not a scratch," he assured her, his eyes warm as they met hers. "You did well, Grace, quick thinking." Sheriff Morris and his deputies took charge of the Doyle brothers, the injured one complaining loudly as they loaded him into a wagon. "Tried to bushwhack me," Owen explained to the sheriff. "Didn't realize I'd circled back through the creek bed, caught them by surprise. Only had to wing the one when he tried to draw on me. Been after these boys for months," the sheriff said with satisfaction. "Wanted for rustling in 3 counties and suspected in a stage robbery last month. You'll need to come in tomorrow to make a statement." "I'll be there," Owen promised. As the sheriff's party departed with their prisoners, Owen turned to Grace, his expression suddenly serious. "You could have been hurt," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "If anything had happened to you, I was afraid for you," Grace interrupted. When I heard the gunshot, Owen stepped closer, his hands coming up to frame her face. "You're the bravest woman I've ever known," he said softly, "riding out like that, getting help." "I was terrified," Grace admitted. "That's what makes it brave," Owen replied. Then slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, he leaned down and kissed her. The kiss was gentle at first, questioning, but when Grace responded, her arms going around his neck, it deepened into something more. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "I think," he said quietly, "that I'm falling in love with you, Grace Donovan, and not just because you saved my ranch today." Grace felt a smile, her crooked, imperfect smile spread across her face. "I think I'm falling in love with you too, Owen Fairfield." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Owen took Grace's hand in his. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "we never did discuss when you'd make your decision about staying." Grace looked at their intertwined fingers, then up at Owen's face, open and honest in the fading light. "I think I've made it," she said, "if you'll still have me." "If I'll still have you," Owen repeated incredulously. "Grace, you're the most remarkable woman I've ever met. You're brave and kind and beautiful, even with my crooked smile," she teased gently. "Especially with your crooked smile," Owen replied seriously. "It's part of what makes you who you are, and I love who you are, Grace Donovan." The wedding took place 2 weeks later in Red River's small church. The whole town turned out for the event, curious to see the mail-order bride who had not only won Owen Fairfield's heart, but had helped capture the notorious Doyle brothers. Grace wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Hollister had helped her alter and carried wildflowers gathered from the meadow near the ranch. Owen, looking uncharacteristically nervous, waited for her at the altar in a new suit, his usually unruly hair slicked down for the occasion. "Dearly beloved," Pastor Jenkins began, beaming at the couple before him. Grace barely heard the words of the ceremony, too caught up in the reality that she was marrying Owen, this good, kind man who had seen beyond her flaws to the person beneath. When he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, his hands were steady but his eyes were suspiciously bright. "You may kiss the bride," Pastor Jenkins announced finally. Owen gently lifted Grace's chin and kissed her, right there in front of everyone, and Grace didn't try to hide her smile, her wonderfully crooked, perfectly honest smile. The first months of marriage brought adjustments for both of them. Grace learned the rhythms of ranch life rising before dawn, the hard work of caring for animals and tending crops, the isolation that could settle in during bad weather when trips to town were impossible. Owen learned to share his space and his decisions, to consider Grace's comfort and preferences after years of answering only to himself. There were occasional disagreements, moments of frustration on both sides, but they found their way through them with honesty and growing affection. By the time winter settled over Red River, they had established a comfortable routine. The cattle were moved to sheltered pastures, the garden put to bed until spring, and the house made snug against the coming cold. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, Grace often reading aloud from one of the books Owen had ordered from back east, or teaching him to play chess on the set he had surprised her with for her birthday in October. It was during one of these quiet evenings, as snow fell softly outside, that Grace set aside her sewing and looked thoughtfully at Owen. "I've been thinking," she began. Owen looked up from the bridle he was mending. "That sounds serious." "Not serious exactly," Grace replied, a slight flush coloring her cheeks. "But important. I was wondering how you might feel about expanding our family." Owen's hands stilled. "Are you saying?" Grace shook her head quickly. "No, not yet, but I'd like to try if you're ready." The smile that spread across Owen's face was answer enough. He set aside his work and crossed to her chair, kneeling beside her and taking her hands in his. "I can't think of anything I want more," he said, his voice husky with emotion, "than to have a family with you." Grace leaned forward to kiss him, her heart full. From that night on, there was a new sweetness to their marriage, a shared hope for the future that made even the hardest days easier to bear. Spring came early to Red River that year. By March, the snow was melting, revealing tender green shoots in the pastures. The cattle gave birth to healthy calves, and the chickens began laying with renewed enthusiasm. Owen expanded the vegetable garden and Grace planted flowers along the path to the house, determined to make their home as beautiful as it was functional. It was in April, as they prepared for the spring cattle drive, that Grace began to suspect their hopes had been realized. The telltale nausea in the mornings, the unusual fatigue, the sensitivity to certain smells all pointed to one joyous conclusion. She waited until Owen returned from a long day of work, greeting him with a special dinner and the news that would change their lives forever. A baby. Owen repeated, his voice filled with wonder after she told him. "You're certain?" "As certain as I can be," Grace replied, her crooked smile more radiant than ever. "We should know for sure in another month or so." Owen let out a whoop of joy that startled the dogs dozing by the fire. He swept Grace into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around the kitchen. "Careful," Grace laughed. "I'm in a delicate condition, remember?" Owen set her down immediately, his expression comically contrite. "I'm sorry, are you all right? Should you be sitting down?" "Can I get you anything?" Grace laughed again, touching his cheek affectionately. "I'm perfectly fine. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I'm not made of glass." "But you're carrying something precious," Owen said, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Someone precious." In the months that followed, Owen's protective instincts only grew stronger. He hired a young cowhand, Miguel Rodriguez, Mrs. Rodriguez's nephew, to help with the heavier ranch work so he could spend more time close to home. He built a cradle from pine wood, carefully sanding it smooth and lining it with soft blankets that Mrs. Hollister helped Grace stitch. The baby grew steadily, and by late summer, Grace's condition was obvious to everyone. The women of Red River rallied around her, sharing advice and hand-me-down baby clothes, while the men slapped Owen on the back and teased him good-naturedly about sleepless nights to come. Dr. Winters confirmed what Grace had already guessed: the baby would arrive sometime in November. "Just in time for Thanksgiving," the doctor observed with a smile. "A fitting gift." As her time grew closer, Grace found herself thinking often of her parents, wishing they could have known Owen and the child who would soon join their family. She spoke of them to Owen, sharing memories and stories, ensuring that their legacy would continue even though they were gone. On a cold, clear night in mid-November, Grace woke to the unmistakable pains of labor. She touched Owen's shoulder gently, waking him. "It's time," she said simply. The next hours were a blur of pain and effort. Owen rode for Mrs. Rodriguez, who had assisted at many births, while Grace paced the bedroom, breathing through each contraction as they grew stronger and closer together. Dawn was breaking when the final push brought their child into the world, a healthy boy with a shock of dark hair and a lusty cry that filled the small bedroom. "You have a son," Mrs. Rodriguez announced, wrapping the infant in a clean blanket before placing him in Grace's arms. Owen, who had been banished to the kitchen during the birth, was called in. His face, pale with worry after the long night, transformed with joy when he saw Grace holding their child. "He's beautiful," Owen whispered, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed, "just like his mother." Grace looked down at their son's tiny face, already showing signs of Owen's strong features. "We need a name for him," she said softly. "Thomas," Owen suggested, his voice thick with emotion, "after my brother, if you don't mind." "Thomas Donovan Fairfield," Grace agreed, her crooked smile gentle as she gazed at her son. "It's perfect." Young Thomas thrived, growing strong and curious about the world around him. By his first birthday, he was toddling around the house on sturdy legs, getting into everything and keeping his parents constantly on their toes. The ranch prospered too. Owen's careful management and hard work paid off with larger herds and better harvests. They were able to hire 2 more hands to help with the cattle, giving Owen more time to focus on expanding the orchard and improving the house. As Thomas's second Christmas approached, Owen surprised Grace with his most ambitious project yet: a proper bathroom with an indoor pump, eliminating the need for hauling water from the well. "This is luxury," Grace marveled, running her hand along the smooth wood of the large copper tub. "I feel like a queen." "You deserve it," Owen said, pleased with her reaction. "You work harder than any woman I know. Life wasn't always easy." There were difficult seasons: drought one summer that threatened the crops, a harsh winter that claimed several calves despite their best efforts, a fever that swept through Red River, keeping Dr. Winters busy day and night. Through it all, Owen and Grace faced each challenge together, their partnership growing stronger with each obstacle overcome. When Thomas was 3, Grace discovered she was expecting again. This pregnancy was harder than the first, leaving her tired and often unwell, but the joy of expanding their family outweighed the discomfort. On a stormy night in August, after a labor that was mercifully shorter than her first, Grace gave birth to a daughter, Eliza Marie, named for both their mothers. Unlike her brother's dark coloring, Eliza had Owen's blue eyes and fair hair that promised to curl like Grace's. "She has your smile," Owen observed one afternoon as he watched Grace nursing the baby. "Look at that little quirk on the right side." Grace looked down and saw that he was right even at a few weeks old. Eliza's smile showed the same charming asymmetry as her own. "Poor thing," Grace said, but without real regret. "She'll have to learn to love it like I did." "I'll make sure she knows it's the most honest, beautiful thing about her," Owen promised, "just like her mother." The years passed in a rhythm of seasons, marked by the children's growth and the expanding prosperity of the ranch. Thomas grew into a thoughtful boy who loved books and showed a natural affinity for working with the animals. Eliza was spirited and fearless, following her brother everywhere and insisting on helping her father with the ranch work from the time she could walk. When Thomas was 7 and Eliza 4, Another addition joined their family, a surprise pregnancy that resulted in another son, James Owen, who arrived in the middle of a spring thunderstorm. The older children were fascinated by their baby brother, Thomas taking his role as big brother very seriously, while Eliza appointed herself James's special protector. As the children grew, so did the community around them. Red River expanded with new businesses and families, many drawn by the railroad that finally reached the town when Thomas was 10. The Fairfield Ranch became known throughout the territory for its quality cattle and Owen's innovative farming methods. Grace found her own place in the community, serving on the school board and teaching part-time when the regular teacher needed assistance. Her Philadelphia education proved valuable in a town hungry for knowledge and culture, and she took pride in helping shape the minds of the next generation. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Owen surprised Grace with a trip back east, her first return since arriving in New Mexico as a mail-order bride. They left the children in the capable care of Mrs. Rodriguez and the ranch hands, and spent 2 weeks visiting Philadelphia, New York, and Boston. It was strange for Grace to see her former home through the eyes of the woman she had become. Philadelphia seemed both smaller and more crowded than she remembered, the pace of life dizzying after the rhythms of ranch life. "Do you miss it?" Owen asked as they walked along streets that had once been so familiar to Grace. She considered this, looking at the fashionable ladies with their tight corsets and complicated hairstyles, the gentlemen in their formal attire. Once she had thought this was the only kind of life worth living, that being a respectable city lady was the height of achievement. "I miss certain things," she admitted. "The libraries, the concerts, some of the conveniences, but no, I don't miss the life. It feels constrained now." Owen nodded, understanding in his eyes. "You've changed. We both have," Grace replied, squeezing his hand. "For the better, I think." They returned to Red River refreshed but glad to be home. The children had grown seemingly inches in their absence, full of stories and achievements to share. The ranch welcomed them back with the familiar scents of sage and pine, the sounds of cattle in the distance, the sight of mountains on the horizon. That night, after the children were asleep, Owen and Grace sat on their porch as they had so many evenings before, watching the stars emerge in the vast New Mexico sky. 15 years, Owen mused, his arm around Grace's shoulders. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you stepped off that stagecoach. Other times I can barely remember what life was like before you came." "Empty," Grace suggested with a smile. "Lonely, quiet, all of that," Owen agreed with a laugh, "though I occasionally miss the quiet part." Grace elbowed him gently. "You wouldn't have it any other way." "No," Owen said, his voice growing serious. "I wouldn't. You and the children, you're everything to me, Grace." Grace leaned her head against his shoulder, content in a way she had never imagined possible when she'd first agreed to become a mail-order bride. "Do you remember what you said when you first saw my smile? Really saw it, I mean." "That it was the most honest thing I'd seen," Owen replied without hesitation. "I think about that sometimes," Grace said softly. "How lucky I was that you saw something beautiful where others had only seen flaws, how that moment changed everything for me." Owen turned to face her, his hand gently tracing the curve of her cheek. "I'm the lucky one," he said. "And I thank God every day that you had the courage to come west, to take a chance on a stranger and a life you couldn't have imagined." "The best chance I ever took," Grace replied, her crooked smile luminous in the starlight. As they sat together on the porch of the home they had built, surrounded by the life they had created, Grace reflected on the long journey from frightened mail-order bride to confident ranch wife and mother. It hadn't always been easy, but every challenge, every joy, every moment of their life together had been worth it. And it had all begun with a crooked smile and a cowboy who had seen the truth behind it, the most honest thing in a world where honesty was the most valuable currency of all. 10 years later, on their 25th wedding anniversary, Owen and Grace hosted a celebration that brought together the entire community. The Fairfield Ranch had prospered beyond their wildest dreams, now encompassing over 2,000 acres with a herd of several hundred cattle, extensive orchards, and fields of alfalfa and wheat. The original log house had been expanded several times over the years, but still retained its warm, welcoming character. A large barn and various outbuildings housed the equipment and animals that made the ranch one of the most successful in the territory, now the state of New Mexico. Tables had been set up in the yard, groaning with food prepared by Grace and the women of Red River. Lanterns hung from tree branches, ready to provide light when evening fell. Musicians from town tuned their instruments, preparing to play for dancing later. Grace stood on the porch, watching the gathering with a sense of wonder. Thomas, now a handsome young man of 23, had recently returned from college in Denver and was showing his fiancée, Rebecca, around the ranch. Eliza, 20, had her mother's spirit and her father's steady confidence. She taught at the Red River School and was being courted by the son of a neighboring rancher. Young James, 16, was the spitting image of his father at that age, already showing Owen's gift for working with animals and the land. "Penny for your thoughts," Owen said, coming to stand beside her. At 50, his hair was more silver than brown now, and the lines around his eyes had deepened, but he stood as straight and strong as the day she'd met him. "Just marveling at how full our life is," Grace replied, leaning against him. Her own hair showed strands of gray, and the years of work and laughter had left their mark on her face, but Owen still looked at her as if she were the young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach so many years ago. "Did you ever imagine this?" Owen asked, gesturing to the gathered friends and family, the prosperous ranch, their grown children. "That day when you arrived in Red River," Grace shook her head. "I was just hoping you wouldn't send me back when you saw my crooked smile," she admitted with a laugh. "All this. It would have seemed like an impossible dream." Owen's arm tightened around her waist. "The best dreams often do until they come true." The celebration lasted well into the night. There was feasting and dancing, stories and laughter, the old-timers like Mrs. Hollister and Sheriff Morris, long since retired, reminisced about the early days of Red River and the young couple who had captured the Doyle brothers. The younger generation listened with half an ear, more interested in their own stories unfolding under the New Mexico stars. As the evening wound down, Owen led Grace away from the gathering, down the path to the creek where cottonwoods whispered in the gentle breeze. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. "For 25 years of making me the happiest man alive." He placed a small box in her hand. Inside lay a delicate gold locket, beautifully engraved with their initials and the date of their wedding. When Grace opened it, she found a tiny photograph on one side, their wedding portrait, and on the other, a recent photograph of their children. "Owen, it's beautiful," she whispered, tears springing to her eyes. "Help me put it on." He fastened the chain around her neck, his fingers brushing against her skin in a touch that still sent shivers through her after all these years. "I love you, Grace Fairfield," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Every day more than the last." "And I love you," Grace replied, her crooked smile as bright and honest as it had been the day he first remarked on it. "My cowboy who saw the truth when no one else did." As they walked back to join their family and friends, hand in hand under the vast star-filled sky, Grace reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. From a frightened young woman hiding her smile to the confident, beloved matriarch of the Fairfield family, she had traveled a path she could never have imagined. And it had all begun with a crooked smile and a cowboy wise enough to recognize it as the most honest thing he'd ever seen.